All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sam Constance. I work in alumni career development at the University of Chicago. Our whole goal is creating programs, resources, opportunities for you to build off of your University of Chicago education into your professional life, grow professionally, and hopefully have a little help from the Chicago alumni community in your career development along the way. Today, I'm really excited and honored to present a wonderful program that we have for you, an Ask Me Anything session with Alida Miranda-Wolff. I'm going to start with a really quick intro to Alida and then turn it over to her to answer all the questions that you have and to tell her story. I'll set the tone for this event. It's going to be conversational, fun, hopefully, and meant to be a little lighthearted and really open. So this is an opportunity for you all, whether you're coming with questions about DE&I work, about culture, about starting your own startup, all of the questions, anything that you have for someone who's experienced in this world, please feel free to share them in the chat, raise your hand, and ask any questions that you have out to Alida directly. This is going to be a fun discussion. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenter today. Alida is the CEO and founder of Ethos Talent, a culture consulting meets diversity, equity, and inclusion firm serving over 30 growing and growth stage companies across the US. At Ethos, Alida focuses on building incredible and incredibly diverse company cultures by creating conditions for everyone to thrive through organizational design, culture strategy, learning and development, and DE&I strategies and practices. Before Ethos, Alida headed up investors, partners, brand, and portfolio company growth at Hyde Park Angels. And while at HPA, she helped grow the organization into the most active early stage investor in the Midwest by developing a people-first approach to investing, one that focused on leveraging human capital as well as financial capital to drive positive outcomes. At HPA, Alida was the first woman hired full-time, the youngest person in her director role nationally by 10 years, and one of only 27 Latinx women in VC. Based on all these experiences, she set out to make her firm more inclusive and eventually launched Ethos to help other startups do the same. Alida speaks, studies, and writes about her unconventional road to entrepreneurship and empowers others to uncover and intentionally go after their own dreams. And I think that's what this conversation is going to be all about today. And Brittany, yes, hashtag goals. Am I right? That is what she is. Yes. All right. Well, Alida, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Maybe we can just kick it off with a little, I know I shared an intro to you, but can you give us an intro to you and your journey in your own words?
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. There are some faces here that I know and others that I don't. So I am looking forward to really opening up a conversation with all of you. As Sam shared, my name is Alida, and I will just start with my identities. I identify as a white Hispanic cisgender woman with an invisible disability, and I am a first-generation immigrant and a survivor of trauma and violence. These are identities that really shape my lens and my approach to my work. What I was noticing is my organization Ethos that I founded, but is very much more than me. In fact, some of our team members are here on this call today, which is very exciting, but for some reason, more pressure inducing. I feel much happier in front of a group of thousands of strangers than of people that I know. But thinking through my journey to this place, one thing I was reflecting on as Sam was sharing is that intro is really from where we were last year, and we are a different organization. So for one, I latched onto that 30 plus clients because we have over 70 and 8 new clients came on last week. So that gives you a sense of what our growth journey has looked like and also what our position and stance has been. I would say that one of the biggest lessons that I've learned is to actually use the power that I have as a founder. I think for a lot of folks who are in marginalized or underserved identities, there's a tendency to underuse our power and to try to take up as little space as possible. And so when I used to talk about what Ethos did, I focused on culture and organizational development and learning tools because that's what I thought other people wanted. And last year was a moment of saying, what is it that we are meant to do? And the reality is, we're a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging transformation firm really focused on structured equity, really focused on advocating for opportunity for people in underrepresented and underserved groups so that we can close that opportunity gap. A few things that I will share before we get into your questions. I really appreciated that folks submitted some in advance. The first is, my road to entrepreneurship was in some ways very circuitous, and I actually have someone on this call to thank for it. So Jerry Huang, who's on this call, was leading entrepreneurship programs at the college at the University of Chicago. And my story there was that I had actually been hit by a car my third year of college. And I had reconstructive surgery. I had to relearn to walk. And during that period of time, I had a decision to make. I was supposed to take a 3-month leave of absence because of my injuries and my recovery. And I didn't want to, because the University of Chicago was the closest thing I had to a community. And I thought I would recover better if I had the mental support and a feeling of social wellness. And so I wanted to go back to the university. I did not, however, want to go to my internship at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where I was a legal intern. The entire time I was at U Chicago up to that point, I wanted to be a lawyer. I had interned at Kirkland and Ellis and Perkins Coie, which are two big law firms. I had started the undergraduate law review. I was on the law school law review, which had never happened before. I was a very determined person in college, I would say. I had started the LSAT support group. I had taken my LSAT 2 years early. I had actually started writing my thesis on the law of coverture in 17th century South Carolina. And I was on the board of U Chicago Women in Law. In other words, I was all in on the law train here. And I realized I didn't want to do it. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I walked into Jerry's office and I said, I want to start a company. And he said, great. Have you ever worked at a startup before? And I said, no. And he said, well, maybe why don't you work at a company that's just started? And then we can come into my office again and talk about starting a company. And he connected with me on a number of occasions to really help me in that path and that journey. And I want to emphasize how important that was to me in this pathway, because there are a few opportunities that I had that I never would have if I hadn't had that support. So the first is, I didn't know what startups were. And that might sound kind of bananas to folks on this line, but it's important to note that I come from a family of Cuban refugees. When I was 16, I asked my mom what an entrepreneur was because I had never heard that word before. And truth be told, I was watching Millionaire Matchmaker, and one of the millionaires that was being matched in a couple was an entrepreneur. And my mom said an entrepreneur is just somebody who's unemployed and doesn't want to admit it. So that was my understanding of entrepreneurship and startups. And so having somebody open the door and say, here are opportunities, go to 1871 here in Chicago, here are companies to potentially invest in. But there are two other things that were important. So I paid for college myself. And it was a really difficult experience. I'm sure that other folks on the line have been in that place. I didn't necessarily meet the socioeconomic demographics of my peers. There were a lot of things I couldn't do, including I couldn't take unpaid internship opportunities. There's no way that I could make rent if I did that. And there was this opportunity with Hyde Park Angels to intern in their associate program, and I just couldn't afford to do it. I was so excited when I got the offer, and it was everything I wanted to do. And it was Jerry who helped me secure grant funding so that I could actually take that job, which completely changed the trajectory of my life and career. And the last thing was, when I was looking at getting a job at a startup and I was thinking about where I was going to go, I couldn't actually afford to go on this trip to Silicon Valley to interview with 10 different tech companies. And once again, Jerry helped me secure grant funding to do that. I have to name it because yes, there's luck involved, and there are many privileges that I hold in my identities. And if it wasn't for those kinds of sponsorships, I wouldn't have been able to do what I would do. And the reason I name that is, for me, that's equity. That's creating the opportunity for equal access and fulfilling an individual need. And if I hadn't had that experience with equity, my whole life trajectory would be different today. I will share a few other things, and then I want to get into your questions. And Jerry, I didn't plan any of that. I just didn't know you were going to be here. So I hope you know how much I appreciate you and how much you shaped my life. I get asked all the time why I started Ethos, and I used to give an answer about the models that I had built in DEIB and how I saw this opportunity in the Midwest. But the reality is I've never belonged anywhere. And I started this company because I wanted to belong somewhere, and I wanted to help other people feel a sense of belonging. And for me, I define belonging as being part of something greater than yourself, that you value and need, and that values and needs you back. So it's about relationships, reciprocity, and resources. And I've actually dedicated my entire professional life to studying belonging for the last 8 years. And I actually have my book coming out in February of 2022 called Cultures of Belonging. That's very much about how to develop a culture of belonging in your organization. So I will pause there and I will hand it back to you, Sam.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that great intro and for sharing a little bit about your story. Looking forward to the book. So you've talked a little bit about, starting off by actually working at a startup rather than just going it alone right off the bat. You've talked a little bit about what motivated you to start Ethos. We had a lot of questions from folks submitted beforehand about actually, how do you do that? How do you go it alone? So you've had experience at a startup, you have this nugget of an idea. What happens next? How do you decide and how do you actually take steps towards forming Ethos?
Absolutely. I was working in venture capital for 3.5 years before I determined that I was going to start a company. And it's important to know that the entire time that I was working in VC, I said I never wanted to be a founder. It was too risky, and I viewed myself as being the perfect second in command. I didn't see myself as at the helm of any kind of organization. I saw myself as organized, detail-oriented, strategic, and the kind of person who could get things done. But I didn't see myself as a visionary. I thought that to be a founder, you had to be charismatic, you had to be convincing, you had to be persuasive, you had to be likable. And at that point in my life, I was really grappling with a lot of issues with confidence and self-esteem, and a lot of the messages that I was getting, very gendered messages within my industry about what I was supposed to be and what I wasn't supposed to be. What was communicated to me is that I would be best in a support type of role, which I know that a lot of folks who identify as women or femme experience. And what changed things for me is that I was very, very tired. That I think is not the answer that folks here are expecting. So I was working 80 hours a week in my firm, and I was having fainting spells from exhaustion. My husband actually used to have to follow me into the shower because I would pass out because I was so tired. And I wrote a burnout plan to present to my managing director, basically explaining that I was physiologically burnt out. And for those of you who are wondering about burnout right now, I just want to say something. When I talk about being burnt out, I mean physically burnt out. I don't produce my own stress hormones anymore. I actually have to take adrenaline. Because that is the level of burnout that I experienced. So there is a difference between emotional burnout, psychological burnout, physical burnout. I experienced all three. And so I wrote this plan. And when I was looking at it with my managing director, what we noted was spending a lot of time helping our portfolio companies that we had invested in with everything to do with people, operations, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I couldn't continue to do that work and maintain the responsibilities of my job because as the director there, I led 4 departments and we had 5 departments total. I had too much responsibility. I was also career coaching and teaching and working on my art show, all outside of work. And what he said to me was, we have to cut this portfolio company work out. It's the only way we can reduce your hours. And I realized that was the only thing that I liked doing. So that set me on a path and a journey over the next 6 months to discover what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And it was a big shift for me because I thought I was going to be building this long career in VC. But I realized that's not what I wanted for myself. And the process started with me just identifying who were leaders who embodied the characteristics I wanted to embody, asking that question of who I wanted to be. And I wanted to be kind, thoughtful, and humble as a leader. Those were the 3 qualities that mattered to me. And I understood they were the 3 qualities that mattered to me because when I had worked with an executive coach at HPA to develop our values, those were the values that my team rejected as not being our company values that made me feel that I did not belong there. And I realized that's what I wanted more than anything. And so I made a list of 16 leaders in all different industries, in all different spaces, in all different size companies who I thought embodied these characteristics. And when I met with them, I asked, who should I be talking to based on what I'm looking for and who I want to be? And so I spent 6 months meeting with people and understanding what they did and how they did it, and starting to realize that people operations in particular and DEIB, that's what was calling to me. That's what I wanted to transition into. So then I started applying for jobs and I got some opportunities, but I was really being pigeonholed, especially in marketing. I was offered a lot of head of marketing jobs. When I say a lot, I mean I was offered 3 different roles in 2 weeks as a head of marketing or a head of brand. And I was really trying to break out of that role because it wasn't, again, what was calling to me. And I had the opportunity to interview for a VP of people role, which gave me the confidence I needed to say I could do this because I made it to final round interviews at a $500 million company. I was 24 years old with basically no exact experience in this space. I had been very tenacious in the application process and had really, really pushed to demonstrate what I could do. And because I didn't have the past history, I focused on these are all of the things I would build. These are all of the ideas I have for you, all of the opportunities I see for you, which is why I made it as far as I did. I lost out that opportunity to the former head of HR at Apple, so I don't feel bad about it at all. Going through that process made me understand, though, that I could see opportunities and build out ideas. And I was already essentially doing this consulting work with my portfolio companies. But when I say that I was really tired, basically what happened is I had this big investor meeting. And I gave a presentation. I always presented at these investor meetings, about 100 people. And I'd gotten really good at it because we had them once every quarter. I put these slides together about how much I appreciated my team and how much they had grown the organization and how at the end of 3 years, we had become everything we set out to become. And all of my team members left during my presentation. And afterwards, I asked, why did you do that? And they basically just said, well, it wasn't that important. We see you all the time. You're always generous with praise. And I, for the first time, probably professionally, felt like I had had it. And the reason that that was important is because I had a meeting with a potential partner the next day, a partner for HPA who had been at that meeting. And I totally didn't want to go to this meeting because I was just angry at the world and feeling really unappreciated and tired. And that meeting had gone until 11 p.m. And I was in this morning meeting with this person that was just going to give this organization that didn't care about me more money, you know, just the worst rumination cycle. And I got there, and the first thing that he said to me over coffee was, so you've clearly outgrown this organization. What's next for you? And when people had said that, because it wasn't the first time I had heard it, even my own managing director had said, the only job left for you in this firm is mine, and I'm not giving it to you. So I knew that I was kind of stuck. I was building out a plan for HPA 3.0. We had gotten to 2.0. So this is what our future was going to be. And I did not share that answer. I said, I want to start a company, and these are all the things this company would do. And the only reason that I'm not going to do it is because I don't have a partner and I don't have any money for it. And it was just very petulantly delivered. I mean, it was not polished. And he said, what if I was your partner? And that forced me to consider starting a company. And I did 4 months of due diligence on him. I built a strategic plan. I had a real advantage and privilege because I had spent years sourcing deals and investing in companies. So I had watched a bunch of our companies fall apart, and I had watched a bunch of them succeed. I knew the things that entrepreneurs actually really needed to start a business. That wasn't capital. And I realized I needed to build that early. And so that's what I did. Ultimately, I just want to be clear, that partnership didn't work out. He was not the right partner for me. We went through a very expensive founder divorce. If anyone ever wants to talk about separating from a founder, I can certainly do that. I went through it, and it is as hard as they say it is. I didn't always believe it, but now I know it. The gift he gave me was forcing me to take this idea and run with it, because I did not believe I could start a company on my own. I did not believe I could do it. And when the relationship didn't work out, I realized I couldn't be the person I wanted to be and continue to work with this person. And so my best option was to run this company alone. And the day after we separated, I closed the biggest deal at the time in Ethos history, and we became extremely profitable pretty much overnight. So it felt like a sign that by following my sense of ethics and integrity in this case, and really committing to DEIB, which was a central fighting point with this partner and me, that I could build a successful business. People always ask me, what was the main thing that you did in going into starting this business that really helped you, that you think led to your success? And I think it's three things. The first is, during those 4 months when I was building that strategic plan, I set up 137 research interviews for my first month in business. So from April 15th to April 31st, I think April 30th, I was in meetings 10 to 12 hours a day, every single day, 7 days a week. And these research interviews served multiple purposes. So I had impact questions that I developed, 5 to 7 questions that were not the questions that people are used to being asked. And I had a research journal, and I was going to write down what they said. In those meetings, though, if I felt that they needed what it was that I was doing, it would convert to me as a sales conversation. If I realized that there was something that we could collaborate on, it would be a partnership conversation. And if it was neither of those things, instead of having to feel the brutal rejection of a failed sales conversation, I could say, well, this is a research interview. I'm just learning. I'm learning from you, and I'm helping understand my market. I have folks still converting from those meetings 3.5 years ago today into clients. I really believe in that process that I took. The second was, I totally blew up my conception of what pitching a business looks like. I'd been judging pitch competitions for years. I thought about the deck and the value prop and the MVP and all of these things that I needed to talk about. And I realized that the best way for me to sell what it was that I did was by telling my life story, and then talking through how I was using that story to find practical solutions to real problems that folks were facing. DEIB work is not a software as a service widget. What you're selling in both cases is not a commodity. It is a feeling. It's just that you're selling a different feeling when you're talking about DEIB. When you're talking about software, a lot of times the feeling that you're selling to people is convenience or efficiency, or the sense that they have everything under control. In DEIB, what I was selling was hope and optimism and security that change was possible. And I had to make it my own. I had to tell my story my way to do that. And I would say the third piece was, I was extremely willing to try a lot of different stuff. So you often hear folks say, you need to be hyper focused on one product or one offering or one service. And I sort of was, but I realized I wasn't running a venture-backed business, and I didn't want to. And the product was my service. So what problems did I want to solve? And basically, anybody who asked me to do something, I said yes, and then figured it out as I went, and worked really hard and tried to apply a critical thinking lens, as opposed to saying, well, there's just one rote way to do this, or I don't have that framework. I just tried the stuff. And for me, I'm really glad that I did, because we became the business that we are due to that flexibility.
Thank you so much. I'm going to follow up with a question from Lauren here. You talked a little bit about the journey towards finding funding and becoming profitable, but you also mentioned that there was a few other things that you really needed to start your company. What do you feel like is there a checklist, or was there a few things at the top of your list that you just needed before you could get Ethos off the ground and running, other than funding?
Absolutely. And I knew that I didn't want to raise funding. That was really important to me. I had become pretty disillusioned with VC in working in it, just how bets were made and how entrepreneurs were talked about, especially those from underrepresented and marginalized groups. But I did care about money. So the first thing I will say is I needed to know my number that made me feel safe. My husband was in graduate school, and there was no fallback option. I was the money in the relationship. I needed to know what number I needed in the bank, and I needed to be able to make in that year to feel safe. And I name that because depending on who you are, that matters a whole lot, or that doesn't matter at all. And what I have seen is that, especially again, talking about folks who are coming from marginalized groups, it matters a whole lot. And that's the difference between starting a business and not starting a business. So I did the math and I put a budget together. And I also set sales targets. And it was a reason that I decided it was going to be a consulting rather than product company, because I knew I could sell my time immediately. That was something that I knew I could do. What I also needed was a launch. This was something that I understood from a branding perspective was really important. I needed an announcement. I needed to get it to as many people as possible, but I needed a vehicle to justify those meetings that I was scheduling. One thing that I think is pretty amazing is 137 meetings. I was able to get all those meetings. Now, I want to name that I came from VC, that I had spent years doing community outreach and development work. So there was a lot of goodwill and mutuality that was happening. But I had a reason that I was reaching out that wasn't just extractive. There's a reductress article that I love, which is "Successful Woman Dies from Having Brain Picked to Death." I never sent an email ever saying, I'm going to pick your brain. I always thought about what I could offer. So when I would reach out to folks, it was an invitation to an event. It was an opportunity for us to collaborate on something. It was free resources. It was free knowledge. It was a connection to someone else. I needed to understand what it was I was going to give. And if you're going to do things when you don't have a network established or you don't have strong relationships established, this is something really important. I learned that at U Chicago because I did not have these high-powered connections to folks. I just didn't. And a lot of the people around me did. But I could give my time, I could give my effort, I could give my energy, I could give my ideas. And I learned to take that approach afterwards. I built a strategic plan. In that strategic plan, I developed my mission, my vision, my values. I developed my competitor analysis. So what spaces did I want to play in? Who existed in those spaces? I sized my total addressable market. I determined what product offerings I was going to put in place. I essentially developed my sales pitch for every offering. And then something that I did, I worked really hard on the brand for 4 months. I was a head of marketing after all, and I wanted an identifiable brand. So I invested in graphic design. I got a website launched. I put together a one-pager, and I put together all of these materials because I understood that in order to be successful, I needed to look like a we instead of a just a me. And my brand could do that because I had a credibility problem. I was 25 when I started this business, and everybody knew me from marketing. And it was okay for me to be a wonderkind in that specialized space. I had given a lot of talks. I'd written a lot of articles. People had seen me in it. And also, you do see a lot of younger marketers. You see a lot of younger marketers make it and are very successful. When we're talking about people operations and DEIB, you do not see a lot of younger people. There is this argument that you have to have a lot of experience in order to be able to do that work. I needed to build some sense of reputation and credibility, which is also why I learned to tell my story and really be able to quantify what I did. to be able to say that I increased diversity in my investor base by 25%, that we went from investing in 3% female founded companies to 20%, and the same for people of color, that our top 3 performing portfolio companies were led by women and people of color, and that we became the most active investor in the Midwest. I worked really hard to craft that story. It was true. I had to pull that data together though. And that was also part of establishing credibility. I shared this with my team members recently, but in the early days, my first week in business, I had a meeting with a very successful woman, a Fortune 500 CEO. She'd seen me in the Chicago Tribune. I was featured as a reason behind the success of HPA. It was a big deal for me. It happened a few months before. And she said she heard that I was starting a business and she wanted to support me. So I went to this lunch with her and she asked me to, just tell me what I was doing and how it was going. And sorry, my screen just totally blanked out, but you're all here. Hi.
It's working.
And so we're at this lunch and I'm just being open with her because she said she wanted to help me and mentor me. And after I pretty much talked nonstop, like right now, for 15 minutes, she said, "You have limited experience and no credibility. You should either go back to business school or get a real job." This is day 4 of my business. And I have just left a real job. And I actually had deferred my business school acceptance for the last year. So as you may know, Chicago has a Boost Scholars program. I got into it, but there's only so long you can defer before you can't go anymore. And I was at that point. I had actually had the conversation with my husband where I said, I'm just going to go to a more emotionally expensive form of business school and start my own business instead of going to business school. So it was a really big moment for me. And I made a decision in that moment that I stand by and that I think really shaped the future of this company. I swallowed my pride and I looked at her and I said, clearly I'm not telling my story well. If you were me, what would you say to you right now? And she told me all of the things she would need to hear. And I had all of those things and I had said a lot of those things. And it really helped me understand that I needed to talk about this business and myself and the work that I was going to do really differently. And that same day, I ended up having a meeting with what would become my first paying client who I'd never met before. And I went into his office and we were talking about DEIB and I just told him my whole life story. Like I said, I would. And I started problem solving. I didn't even think about, what product I was going to pitch or what offerings. I just asked him what was going on. And I realized that for me, I didn't like sales. I thought sales were icky. I loved problem solving. If I treated every sales meeting as an opportunity to help, as an opportunity to help solve a problem that mattered to me, I could run a successful business. And so I would say from that story, what I took was understanding the power of feedback and collecting more information, not personally identifying with that feedback, and then choosing a pathway that was true and authentic to me.
And it sounds too like you've really worked on honing and crafting your story, and your entire credibility in your business is built around your story. And I think that is one half, right, of what makes you an expert networker. Maybe half 2 of what makes you an expert networker is it seems you're really good at operationalizing and having processes in place for, when you want to do something, going out and actually making it happen. Can you tell me a little bit about how perhaps you operationalize, or even just in your own brain, how you keep track of your network, your contacts? How do you transition a coffee meeting to a meaningful relationship or even potentially to a client?
Absolutely. So the first thing I'm going to say is, I don't know how many people here know their Myers-Briggs or are into Myers-Briggs at all, or 16 personalities, but I am an ENFJ and I am a very strong J. What that means is I'm very planful.
A super J is what they call it.
Yes, super J. I am a 96% J. I'm pretty on the cusp with my other ones, But that one, there is no doubt. I have never been a P, even though I admire them greatly in their ability to brainstorm and break with structure, but I can be very rigid. And what I would say is at this point, when I'm starting my business, I understand that that's a skill set for me because I don't actually know a whole lot of folks who are that planful. So what I decided to do was I was going to lean into my strengths. And I have a strength for being able to put a plan together. So I invested in tools pretty much right away. I investigated a bunch of different CRMs, decided I liked Copper the most and put that in place. I investigated a lot of project management systems, decided I like ClickUp, put that in place. So I started architecting systems to store and gather information so I would have it on hand. But I think it's just as important to understand what are you using these systems and tools for? So I'm going to just take a step back and say, while I was career coaching and while I was teaching, one of the things I loved to do was help adult learners find what they were called to do. And in order to do that, I developed a purpose statement exercise where I would help people think through their why. I had a why. At the time, too, when I'm starting my business, I had 3 silver bracelets made for me that said, give to receive, always learn, and give love, because that's what I wanted to do every single day. So that was my first framework. This is how I want to be. This is how I want to show up. I also love the Desire Map by Danielle Laporte. And I set, instead of, okay, so let me take a step back. I love New Year's resolutions. I have set them every year since I was 15, and I have never missed them. And I set really ambitious New Year's resolutions, like get a book deal or start a business. That's the kind of thing that I do. But I also understand that goals are not the point. It's how you feel when you achieve the goal. And I bet every single person here has achieved a goal and been like, blech, when they did. Like it didn't bring any sense of achievement or joy or anything. And that's because you have to think, in my opinion, and Danielle Laporte's, about how you want to feel and then set the goal around it. So I set core desired feelings every single year. And that starts to shape my life. So I love to use the Best Self Planner, and I run my life in 13-week sprints, but I have my core desired feelings and my 5 goals for the year that I'm working across the whole year in. That structure for my personal growth and development and my personal management that is tied to my overarching why, which for those of you who are wondering, my why is to teach love, scale empathy, and heal harm. Those are the things I stand for. Those are the things that I'm here to do. Then I can, starting with that why, do what's right for me in terms of putting these organizational pieces in place. And there are some things that I've elected to do and others that I haven't. I took handwritten notes in my research journal, and I keep a lot of research journals. So I read 2 books a week. Lately, it's been more like 3 or 4 because I've been feeling more anxious, and that's my strategy for calm. So it's not a competition thing. It's not a numbers thing. The only time that I feel like I can really turn off and get inside of myself in a calm way is when I'm reading. So if I'm feeling especially anxious, I make more time for reading. It's time that is only for myself. I take notes on everything I read, and I keep research journals year by year by year. It actually made writing my book pretty easy because I didn't have to do any research. I've been doing research for years. But the point is that system works for me. And so when you're asking about how did I keep all of these people in mind or what they cared about or what they needed, I do have a good memory. I also have those research journals, and then I can port that information into something like a CRM so that I remember your work anniversary and your birthday and your favorite type of coffee and the book that you're going to really love. And that's important to me to be able to do, because going back to what you were saying, Sam, about being a good networker, I remember being in a conversation and getting an unexpected compliment, which, you know, is the best kind, but I took it really badly in the moment, which is why I remember it. So it came from a consultant who was running one of the top 100 consulting firms in the US. And he said, you're going to have a successful business because you're a natural networker. And I really thought the word networking was icky. So I thought, because you're a really transactional person who monetizes people. I realized afterward, though, what he was saying is that I'm relational. And what motivates me in networking is I really like people. And I like being in front of people and being able to connect with them. And so every system I've built has been about, how do we make this connection deeper and how do I make this person feel seen? I spent a lot of time on gifts for folks, and I gave gifts to everyone I did research interviews with in that first month. But for me, gifts can be an act of service because I can show you how much I paid attention to you, and I can show you how much you matter to me in what it is I'm giving you. Because for me, again, I want to be kind, thoughtful, and humble. What better way to be thoughtful than to show and represent? And so that went into my system. The other thing I'll say is, I think about networking as an opportunity to help. And when I made that shift, it did not become, it was no longer difficult to network. When I thought every opportunity was an opportunity to be helpful, which is very aligned with my personal mission, I didn't feel like I was in weird or awkward or transactional conversations. And it was very rare that I felt my time was wasted. I think probably, again, many of you here have been in meetings where you're like, oh, what was the point of that? But that reframe for me, I could say, well, the point of that was I introduced this person to someone else, and there'll be a net good that comes from that. Or I learned about X, or I learned about Y. And that's another thing that I will say. Rihanna has a tattoo that says never a failure, always a lesson. And in terms of building organizational systems, I would say that actually the best tool that I've had in my arsenal is being iterative. I never think about, okay, this system is broken and therefore I'm just not going to be organized, or I'm not going to use a CRM anymore. I'm not going to use a project management software anymore. Or I say, okay, well, why isn't it working? And what can I do to make it work? How do I adapt to the situation and the needs of the situation?
Lesson learning from bad girl Riri. I'm 100% on board with that. Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to transition a little bit here to some of your knowledge and expertise about building culture. We had quite a few questions about this come in ahead of time. So I'm going to kind of lump them together and then I'll let you go for it. So first, how do you know when it's worthwhile to try to change a bad workplace culture versus leaving a bad workplace culture? And we also had I think a really poignant question about folks feeling a little bit powerless in trying to make a change to their workplace culture or just to their own, identities at work. For anyone who maybe isn't necessarily in a management position, what is something that they could do to contribute to building or shaping the culture that they're looking for at their organization?
I'll start with the second question first, and then I'll move on to the first. And I will say there are definitely a few signals that you should leave an organization versus stay. I do want to remind folks, you can always leave. And I know that it might not feel like you can. When I was really stuck in one of my jobs, my mentor said, you can leave this job. And I said, no, I can't. I have a family support. I have a family to support. I need the money. Like, I can't make this choice. And she said, you can make bad financial decisions. You can have too much credit card debt. You can end up living with your parents. These are options. It's just whether that option is better than the one you have now. And it wasn't meant to be a pull yourself up by the bootstraps, personal responsibility. She herself was coming from a marginalized group. What she was saying is, we get into this mindset of forgetting that we have the power to leave. And that we have the power to make a change. And things might be really hard and it might not be perfect, but we are never as trapped as we may think we are. And so that's the first thing I'll say. But the second thing I'll say is that same mentor gave me a piece of advice that has stayed with me forever, which is, I was in a culture that was in many ways really bad for me. And I just felt like I wasn't ready to leave. Because it is a feeling. You may know that you can't change the culture and you're not ready to make a transition because you don't know what you want to do, because the people that are there you're attached to and you're not ready to leave them because you have unfinished business. And I'll use an acting analogy in a second to sort of explain where I'm going with this. you can always have an impact on the people who are in your closest circle. So when I was feeling really lost and defeated and unable to impact my culture, right? I had an organization that said to me point blank, but we don't care about kindness, humility, and thoughtfulness. We care only about excellence and performance, which, to be clear, I really care about those things too, just not at the expense of those other pieces. Who could I influence? The people I worked with most day to day. Really simple example, I love to give gifts. I always got birthday presents. I didn't ask for them. I didn't make a requirement because I was thoughtful in giving people gifts. They gave me gifts too. Because I said thank you all the time, they said thank you too. Because I told people what my needs and preferences were around communication, around working hours, they did the same. I worked at that relational level to establish mutuality. You can always have an influence on your smallest circle, even if you can't make structural or process-based changes. Now, sometimes that won't be enough for you. And that has very much been my experience too. And I have made quote unquote bad decisions as a result. So I was in management consulting and I was in this organization and it was bad for me. Okay. It was really bad for me. I would say I had an extreme case of the Sunday scaries. I would rewatch the same seasons of Parks and Rec all day on Sunday, crying on my couch, not moving. I need you to understand something about me. I'm pretty hyperactive. I am always doing things. When I'm exhausted and stressed out, I will color code my refrigerator. I will reupholster a bench. I will paint a giant bunny painting. Like, I don't do well with the veg because for me, restoration comes from making things. So if I'm lying on the couch all day watching TV, you know something's really wrong because that's not my preference. That's not who I am. It was an environment where the culture was the reason. I actually really liked the work I was doing. I liked my hours. I liked my product. I really believed in my product that I was working on. It was an environment where if you tore another person apart in a meeting, you would be rewarded, where it was about being as critical as possible, where I hesitated because my colleague was really letting me down on a project. And finally, I escalated the situation because he just wasn't listening to me, but also he had made a multi-million-dollar error in calculating pricing on a product because this is a big company. And I just didn't want to be responsible for that. And so I escalated it. He was fired that day, and the director in my department came to me personally to thank me because I was the reason that my colleague was fired, which was, of course, my greatest fear and why I hadn't spoken up sooner. It was an environment where I had to rewrite the same report 10 times in 1 week, and my director printed it out, held it up in front of my pod mates and said, "There's an extra space in the footnote." And I laughed, and he looked at my colleague and said, "Jessica, could you do something like this?" And she said, "No, I could not." And he said, "Because I'm a nice guy, it's not going to end up in your performance review this time, but don't let it happen again." That was the environment. There was no effect I was going to have on that culture. And it was important for me to understand that that wasn't my fault, that there wasn't anything wrong with me, that it wasn't some deficiency or lack in me, that that environment did not work for me. And so I was going to leave, and I was going to leave after 6 months. What it comes down to is that acting analogy. So if you've ever done community theater or high school theater, you might have heard this from a director. You're on stage and your director says, "You're only eating half of the cookie. Eat the whole cookie." There is a sense of closure that comes from feeling like you ate the whole cookie, that you've done what you can in an organization. And it's really hard to leave if you don't feel that you've eaten the cookie. So when you think about the culture of an organization, do you feel like you've done what you can do? And you would be proud to tell someone else about why you left? And if the answer is yes, then I think it's time. I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that millennials leave companies every 2 years. What do companies offer millennials? Lifetime employment came from when organizations invested in pension plans and paid for your education and guaranteed you a track to promotion and offered you security. Now, that's not what organizations do. Of course, you're going to become a consumer of jobs. Jobs have become consumers of employees. That's the give and take. That is the way in which you have your power. So it's really about that personal decision and asking, have I done all that I can do? The last thing I'll say on this, I like to go to a lot of different sources when I'm making decisions, and I do go to poetry a lot. There's a poet by the name of Prajita Sharma, who is one of my favorites, and she wrote a book of poems called Grief Sequence after the loss of her husband to cancer. And in the very end, she basically writes an uneulogy. And she writes, what if closure is not about a closing, but a series of openings? When you feel stuck, it's because you don't see possibilities. There are always possibilities. And so if you're in this place of asking, do I stay? Do I go? And you feel paralyzed in that decision, instead of worrying about the closure or thinking about the past, consider what other doors might be open. And I don't just mean that professionally, what other opportunities, what other networks. If you make this decision, what are the many choices you may have? And which of those stick out to you and are most relevant to you?
I really appreciate that. That's a wonderful message of hope and confidence instilling as well. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to share maybe one last question here. We've been talking a lot about your work and the grind. Would love to hear a little bit more about how you prioritize or what you prioritize perhaps in your personal life that fills your cup and that makes you a better person at work.
So those core desired feelings really help shape my personal life as well as my professional life. The 4 things that I'm trying to feel. I always had 5. That was my goal. 5 was my number. And I realized that I'm constantly overcommitted. So I chose to have 4 feelings this year. And I want to feel calm, inspired, energized, and prosperous. So I want to do the things that help me feel those things. And when I think about what makes me feel calm, I'm a certified mindfulness and meditation practitioner. And I realized that it was really difficult for me to practice mindfulness in the way that I wanted. So I do work with a mindfulness coach, Yal Shai. And I want to share this example with you because it's about that possibilities piece. I read Yal Shai's book, What Now? Which is about mindfulness and meditation in your 20s and 30s, but I think it applies to any situation. And I loved it. And I actually saw her read it in 2018 when it had come out. And thinking about possibilities, I emailed her. And I just thought, I loved your book. It was so meaningful to me. I would love to talk with you. And she said, I actually do one-on-one coaching. I don't advertise it, but it's something available. So I work with her now, somebody who I looked up to, I thought was totally inaccessible to me. Oh, and by the way, that's something I do all the time. I email authors who I'm obsessed with about how much they matter to me. And almost all of them respond. So that's just one thing to
Love that idea.
A lot of things is just because you don't try it. But if you try it, people respond. Kate Bolin wrote a book called Spinster that I was obsessed with. And I just emailed her to be like, I'm obsessed with this. And she emailed me back and she was telling me all about her process. And then she was like, I'm writing another one. Keep your eye out for it. And we were just in this conversation. So in terms of feeling calm, I practice mindfulness and meditation. I read. Reading is what makes me feel the most calm. And I love going to the library. I love gardening. I have 48 plants, many of which I have grown myself. I do a lot of plant propagation. I am a hoarder of animals. I have 4 rabbits and 2 cats, and I would have 11 rabbits if I was allowed, but I'm not because I don't live alone. And that's a big part. I was a working artist in the city of Chicago for a long time. COVID really meant that I gave up my art studio, but I've turned my house into my art studio. So I have 8 gallery walls. I've made major installations for it. I've done collages and paintings, which has been a big part. Probably the thing that makes me feel most calm in the world is organizing. I love the home edit and Maria Kondo, and everything in my house is always being organized, color coded, sorted. Yes, I'm a Monica. I just have to accept it. I want to be a Phoebe, but I'm a Monica. And I care a lot about organization. To feel energized, I love and live for ideas. And I find that being in ambulatory states, so walking, pacing, having my headphones on, gives me that experience. I practice yoga every day. And I am also, to feel energized, looking at those relational connections, but making new things is huge for me. To feel inspired is a lot of the things that make me feel calm, honestly. But I would say some of the things that most inspire me, I love to go to the Museum of Contemporary Art. I love to plan. I love to plan. I plan my day, I plan my week, I plan my quarter. I think any problem can be solved with a list. That makes me feel really inspired. I also really love the opportunity to just dialogue with people and brainstorm ideas and explore possibilities. And for me, feeling prosperous is about actually being able to control my time. So some of the things that I do at work are I always schedule my doctor's appointments during the workday, always. And that's part of my workday, because I need to feel like I have that flexibility and I have that ability to make choices about my health and my life. So it's a different, maybe, conception of prosperity, but for me, prosperity is being able to achieve balance and being able to feel like I am an agent in my own life, which especially now during COVID feels hard. My favorite meme to come out of this period is we're not working from home, we're living at work. And I know we're almost at the end of time, but if there's a message I'm going to leave with you, it's this one. Since COVID started, everybody's working more. It's not just a feeling, it's actually true. You're working 48 minutes longer each day. That means you're adding 5 hours of additional work each day that you're not being compensated for. If you are a caregiver of any kind, to a parent, to a child, to chosen family, you've added anywhere from 10 to 15 hours of domestic work a week during COVID. That again is unpaid for labor. There's a reason there's a burnout epidemic happening. We are all working more. We're not getting anything for it, and we're unsupported. So my reminder to you all is that there are many different ways to feel supported and cared for. And my one gripe with self-care is that it's not well defined. I love Taylor Elise Morrison's definition, which is listening within and responding in the most loving way possible. And I don't believe in having to do these things alone. Self-care, in my mind, sometimes makes it too much about personal responsibility. And we have to have communities to rely on. I really highly recommend How We Show Up by Mia Birdsong. It's a book on community that is really beautifully written. And I recommend that you think about what it would mean to be socially well. We're in Social Wellness Month right now. And I think about social wellness as seeking the care, support, and groupness that your community can provide to feel like you have what you need to thrive. Don't take everything onto yourself. We need other people. And this is a good time to remember that you have them and to build bridges to them. So if I think about balance in my work, it was starting my group Embolden and having my women's mastermind and deciding that I was going to go to a therapist for the first time, really, and deciding that I needed people around me to help me. Because if I was going to carry everything on my own, I needed to recognize that self-sufficiency is a kind of poverty, and it was one that was self-imposed. So that was a big lesson for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so many insights today and so many words of wisdom and hope. And I think really the only thing we missed out of this session was a tour of your house and your art and your plants. But thank you so much, Alida. Thank you to everyone on the line, everyone who submitted questions. My cup is full coming out of this event, and I'm looking forward to more conversations with you in the future. I put a survey in the chat. Please share your thoughts about this event, your kudos for Alida that I can pass along, and any ideas that you have for future events that would be useful for you from the Chicago community. Alida, thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, everyone.
We're getting lots of words of love in the chat. I love it. All right. Well, have a wonderful day, everyone. Happy Tuesday.